So we're starting our discussions about the Majestic-class battleship off nice and strong with the one that was lost in combat. Today, let's discuss the life, career, and death of the HMS Majestic. The HMS Majestic was launched from the Portsmouth dockyard on January 31st, 1895, and would be commissioned in December of that same year, joining the Royal Navy. Now, she had a long history of being flagship for various admirals and vice admirals throughout her career, and I'm not going to get into those details. Let's just talk about where she ended up, particularly before the outbreak of World War I. Now, she was initially placed with the Channel Fleet, where she would operate primarily, unsurprisingly, in the English Channel, mainly out of Portsmouth, where she was built. During this time, she did serve as the flagship of the Channel Fleet, becoming sort of this illustrious prize the British Navy would sort of tout around. After all, she was at the time the largest battleship in the world. In 1897, she was present at Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee at the Spithead Naval Review during those celebrations, where she was sort of the star of the show. And just a few years later, in 1902, she would be present at the Coronation Review for King Edward VII as he assumed the role of King of England. That would also be held at Spithead, by the way. In September of 1902, she would pay a visit to the Mediterranean, stopping off in the port of Crete, which is actually fairly close to where she lays now, before being brought back to Portsmouth in 1904 for some refits. Those saw some minor modifications, and while she was in refit, the fleets were reshuffled, and the Channel Fleet became the Atlantic Fleet, which she was now a member of. In 1907, she'd be moved to be part of the Nord Division of the Home Fleet, stationed around the British Isles, where she would briefly serve as the flagship of that fleet before the title of flagship was handed over to a different battleship. In 1908, she'd be brought back in for another refit. This refit would be slightly more significant, seeing her fitted with wireless systems, which were being placed on a lot of her sister ships as well. After those refits, she'd be returned to the Home Fleet and stationed in Devonport. While undergoing maneuvers in May 1912, she would have her first minor scrape with trouble when she collided with her sister ship, the Victorious. No major damage was reported on either vessel, but it was a collision, and that's significant. However, the most significant events of her career were about to start, because in 1914, the First World War broke out. With the outbreak of World War I, many British warships saw their position sort of jostled around. The Majestic started the war serving in the Channel Fleet, protecting British expeditionary forces as they crossed from the United Kingdom over to France to fight on the Western Front. This is the role she played for most of the first portion of the war, 1914 into 1915. On November 15th, 1914, she fired her guns in anger for the first time when her and the battleship Revenge were tasked with shelling some German artillery positions along the coast in Belgium. However, in February of 1915, she would be tasked with protecting British forces making their way to the Dardanelles and would be moved to the Mediterranean. The Majestic, along with the battleships Albion and Triumph, would become some of the first Allied warships to enter the Straits as they began attempting to shell the Turkish positions positioned along the sides of the Dardanelles. During this engagement, she would take some minor damage, being shelled from above in an attack that left several wounded and one dead on board, and ultimately failed to break through the Turkish defenses. The Majestic was pulled back and would later be used to support from an artillery position the shelling of the landing positions on Gallipoli ahead of British, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers landing on the beaches there. During this campaign, she was also tasked with destroying a British submarine that had become stuck on the coastline and needed to be destroyed to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Ultimately, she suffered minor damage from the Turkish coastal batteries, one of which was below the waterline but didn't exactly sink her. But ultimately, the thing that did her in was, while she was moored off Cape Helles, protected by other ships, a German submarine, U-21, managed to slip through the lines and fire a single torpedo that hit the Majestic pretty much square on. Following a huge explosion amidships, the ship capsized and sank in only 9 minutes in 54 feet of water, the sinking ultimately leaving 49 men dead. The ship ultimately was left sitting upright on the sea floor, with her masts actually poking out of the water, but in storms over the years, they would eventually collapse. The wreck still sits there, and it is still a pretty common diving site for people in that area to this day. The Majestic would start this long lineage of the Majestic class of battleships. If you'd like to learn about what made this class so specific, or the careers of any of her sisters, I'll leave a link up here to a playlist I'm building all about the Majestic class, so you can learn about her sister ships and what made the Majestic class so significant. And if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Barbettes and Binnacles, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.